is a standalone gospel that gives us more details and more fill-in-the-blanks than we get in the other three. And in studying John's gospel, you find out that one of the things that John does is treat the miracles of Christ differently. He gives us some things that the other three don't have about the miracles of Jesus, as well as many of the sayings or teachings of Jesus. So I just want you to understand that, because I think the miracles that John gives of the life of Christ are essential to his purpose. And I want you to turn to the back of the gospel, okay? Go to the last chapter of John's gospel, if you would. Chapter 21, actually not the last chapter, but the next to the last chapter. Is that right? Yeah, 21's the last chapter. Go to the last chapter and look, if you would, just before the last chapter, go back to chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. And here's what John records. And truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in the book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. What he is saying here is that he has written these things and all about these miracles so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you would have life in his name. In other words, you're saved, you're born again, as John talks about in the 3rd chapter. You're born again because you understand who Jesus is and you give him your life, and by giving him your life, it's that you give your life to the one who has proven that he is the Son of God, therefore he's uniquely qualified to be your Lord, and that because you have believed on his name, in other words, on his authority, therefore you can have eternal life. That is the purpose of John's book. He wrote these things so we might understand that Jesus is the Lord's salvation. He is the Son of God. He is the one who died for our sins and rose from the dead, and that he's the only one by which we can be saved by entrusting our life to him. That is what this gospel was written for. That's the purpose of it. And if that's the purpose of the gospel, then that's the purpose of the miracles of this gospel. And there are several miracles in this book that are treated as sign miracles. They're treated as miracles that are meant to teach you something, not to just heal somebody, but to teach you something you need to know in using the miracle to get that across. And so we have seven special miracles in the Gospel of John. And if you want to ask the question, what are the purpose of the miracles? The purpose of the miracles are what we just read. They're written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. The miracles are meant to be part of the narrative that convinces people that Jesus is God's plan of salvation, that he is the way of salvation. He is the only way to heaven. And so if you need the proof, John gives you the proof. Now, John was that beloved disciple. He was the disciple that was always closest to Jesus. He was the disciple that stayed with Jesus, even with the ladies, whenever Jesus went to the cross, and everybody else and all the other disciples forsook him. John's the one that stayed by the stuff. He's the one that was loyal. He was the one that was constantly drinking in the teachings of Christ. He was the youngest of the bunch. So they treated him like he was a teenager while they were all mature adults, so-called. And so he got to understand a different element of who Christ was. So by the time that he's writing this gospel, several decades after the other gospels are finished, he is now, around 100 A.D., he is now an older man, 80s, 85, 90, who knows. Many believe that he lived to be well over 100 years old, because after this, he gets sent to the Isle of Patmos, and he's there for a long time until the pastors come from Asia Minor to visit him, and God gives him the revelation. And that revelation is then given a copy to each of those 7 pastors, and they take it back, and it empowers the church for the second 100 years after Christ. It is the most powerful tool in the hands of those pastors and missionaries in all the Roman Empire and beyond, because he gave us fill-ins about the life of Christ that the others didn't give, both in the gospel, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, as well as the revelation. He gives us things the other writers of the gospel did not give us, and it was like it's like when all the other writers, they were part of, with John, the engine and the power of the gospel in the first 100 years. But if you've ever seen drag racing, how many of you men like to watch drag racing? Some of you here? Okay, good. How many of you ever did that? Have you ever did that? Okay, we got some confessing going on here. Okay, all right. If there's any police officers, those are the ones you want to watch on Saturday night, man. When I was a teenager, we liked to go out in the country and we'd find a straight piece of road, and we would challenge each other to racing. And most of us had clunkers. I had an old clunker, and I would drag race against other clunkers. But there's some guys that come out there with like Cobras with these big 500cc engines and 500 horsepower engines, and they come out there and they've got Positrack rear end. My buddy that I was friends with, he bought him, and our senior year, he bought him a Plymouth Roadrunner 440 six-pack. Now, that's not a beer. For you ladies out there wondering why do you put a six-pack on his car, No, it's a 440 is a large Plymouth engine. And he had 3 two-barrel carburetors lined up on top of that manifold, on top of the engine. And then he had a black fiberglass hood with a giant hood scoop to ram that air into those 3 Hollies and cause that engine to just explode. And if he let the clutch out too fast, it would pop a wheelie when he took off for the quarter-mile race. I didn't race against him. I knew a whole lot better than to race against him. But I would be glad to be the guy that dropped the flag between the guy he was racing, and they would go screaming down that straightaway. And I saw the power differences in different kinds of cars, like my little Rambler versus his Plymouth Roadrunner with that crazy hood scoop on there. So I understood the difference in power levels. Well, all of the gospel's powerful. But whenever you take the Gospel of John, and a few decades after the other Gospels are gone and are finished, and people are using them throughout the Roman Empire, but now John gives his gospel. And it ignites a second generation. And it pushes the power of the gospel to a whole nother level. Here's the last eyewitness disciple of Jesus writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit in the dynamic needs of the day, but writing the truth of the life of Christ in the Revelation and in John's gospel. And he writes that, he says, his purpose in writing that is so that you might believe that Jesus is who he said he was. That's the purpose of it all. This is done so that we might be able to prove and understand who Jesus is. Well, one of the things that he gives us to make that happen are 7 miracles that are designated as sign miracles. They're miracles that prove. They're miracles that other people may have done miracles in the Old Testament. We have several of those. But Jesus' miracles are some that no one ever has been able to do except Jesus. And so they add more credibility to the story and more power, if you will, to the story. We've already talked about one of them. It's in chapter 2. That was whenever Jesus helped them with the fellowship around a wedding, and they ran out of wine. The special kind of wine that they used back then was a celebratory wine. It wasn't so intoxicating as our wine is, but they ran out, and it was going to ruin the festivities because they would last sometimes a whole day or maybe two. And so he took the water in the well, and as it was being brought from the well to the kitchen, it was transformed into this ambrosia that was better than any wine anyone had ever tasted. Jesus would later say, when he passed around the cup at the Lord's table, at the Lord's Supper, he said, "I'll not drink of this again until I drink it with you new in my Father's kingdom." So Jesus, that first water that he transformed into that ambrosia drink, was giving them a taste at the wedding of what you and I will taste when we get to heaven. Very powerful, fellowship-oriented, life-giving ambrosia. And so that's the power of that first miracle. The second miracle was the healing of the nobleman's son in chapter 4. And that as well was a powerful miracle because it was done at a distance. And it was done to a man that wasn't necessarily committed to the Old Testament. But he now believed that Jesus was the Messiah because he could heal his son who was in another town, suffering from an illness, too sick to come to Jesus. But by healing him at a distance and healing a Gentile, he was sending the signal, and John was by his gospel, that Christ came not just for the Jews, but he came for the Gentiles and all who would have faith like this nobleman had faith that Jesus could heal his son. The third miracle that he did in John's gospel is the healing of a man at the pool of Bethesda in chapter 5. We talked about that one last week, and what a powerful miracle that was, and how they've just recently discovered that pool. And critics all talked about how this never existed. There's never been the Romans never designed it. The Jews never designed a pool, a public bathing pool that had 5 sides like the pool of Bethesda is described in the scriptures. And guess what? They turned over some dirt and found it. And it's right there in Jerusalem where the Bible said it was. And the skeptics of the last 300 years complaining about it now have gone silent. And now they're finding something new to gripe about, because that's all liberals do, whether it's in politics or if it's in religion. All liberals do is gripe and complain and insist that truth is not truth. That's all they do. And they'll do that when they're in hell 1,000 years. It won't make any difference. If you're here without Christ and you don't want to give your life to Christ, whatever's keeping you from Christ, whatever you're complaining about, that God's not good enough for you, which makes you put yourself in position above Christ, above God, that's why you're going to be separated from Him forever. He doesn't want anybody on His throne but Himself. And if you have to be on the throne, if you have to be in control, if you have to be the boss, there's a place for you. And it's your own choosing to go there. And that's why only the humble can come to Christ. If God were to let some unbeliever into heaven, he would do what Satan did millennia ago and turn heaven into hell by a rebellion. So never again will there be someone like Lucifer who would disrupt God's plan. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. And the reason it's going to be a day of rejoicing is because there's never, ever going to be a Lucifer again. There's never, ever going to be one sickness again. There's never, ever going to be one sin ever committed again. There'll never, ever be a temptation ever again. And that's what we're looking forward to at the coming of Jesus. And the healing at Bethesda is just more evidence on our side. And then you have in the 6th chapter the feeding of the 5,000 men plus the women and children. You want to look at that in chapter 6 with me? It's a very powerful miracle. And Jesus was teaching by the Sea of Galilee, verse 1, and then verse 2, a great multitude followed him because they saw his signs which he performed on those who were diseased. So he's also doing other miracles. He's healing people that are sick. Jesus went unto the mountain. There he sat with his disciples. And now the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near. And Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, besides the crowd he already had, now here comes all the people out of the villages around the Sea of Galilee. And the disciple, and he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" Now he knew what he was about to do. He knew he was about to turn a little kid's lunch into enough food to feed a multitude. He knew that. But he's asking them a rhetorical question. What do you think we ought to do, guys? Verse 6 says, "But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that everyone might have just a little bite." That's a lot of money. I mean, you're talking about thousands of Happy Meals here. Verse 8, one of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves," that's about this big, not much bigger than a biscuit, "and 2 small fish, sardines size." Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." That was him saying, "That's enough. That's enough. Tell them to sit down." He didn't send anybody to the grocery store. Nobody's going through the drive-thru. Just tell them to sit down. He took that little bitty lunch of that boy, and he got 12 baskets, and he blessed it, and he just started putting it in the baskets. And then those guys would take the basket, and they would walk among the people, those 12 disciples at that time, and they would walk among the people. And they'd reach in, hand them a piece of barley, and hand them a sardine or 2, and think that's it. And then they would look in it, and magically more appeared. And as they kept passing it out, as soon as they would hand it out, more would appear. That's how the Lord provides. We want God to give us 3 truckloads of sardines and 4 truckloads of bread in advance before we'll believe Him. When He wants us to just reach in a basket under the cloth and pull out the food and trust that when I need it, I can reach in there again. He doesn't want us to see it all in advance. That's not faith. He wants us to see that He will make provision for us moment by moment as we need it. That's what He's trying to do. That's what He's teaching in this miracle. And as He does that, I mean, it helps everybody to see, because He's not far from the cross at this point. It helps everybody to see just how powerful He is as the Creator provider. And then we have another miracle in the 9th chapter. He heals a man of his blindness, but it's different than some healings in that 9th chapter, verses almost the whole chapter. In that 9th chapter, He heals a man who was born blind. It's different than if you're restoring sight to somebody who went blind. This man never had sight. He had to reach back into the stages of life before birth. He had to heal at the level of DNA in order to fix him. Now that's an amazing thing, because I have a friend that's studying that as a science, and they're using DNA to predict when people will be sick. They can actually take and study your DNA even before you're born and predict the odds of you having cancer in your 50s. And pretty soon it's going to be so accurate that they'll be able to say, your newborn baby is going to have cancer at 45 years age. It's going to be this kind of cancer in this part of their body. And then they can help you to make sure that the diet and the other things in that child's life will buy them years of life, and they'll know how to treat it the moment that it appears, because they're ready for it. We're on the edge of that already, and they've been on the edge for a while, and there's more that could be released that they haven't released. But that's what Jesus did. When He healed the man born blind, He went all the way back before that child was created. And at the moment of the creation of that child, when that child was blind, something went wrong in the DNA. And Jesus went back and healed him so that he was given his sight in a more miraculous way than anyone else had ever received sight. Very powerful moment. And that's why John included that miracle, I think, to show that Jesus was Lord of our health at the micro level. I like the one in chapter 6 as well, verse 16 and following, where Jesus is walking on the water on the Sea of Galilee. You talk about proving yourself to be more powerful than nature. The disciples are going across the lake, which is six miles by 9 miles. 6 miles by 9 miles. And when the Bible says when they're in the middle of the storm, okay, that Jesus comes walking in the storm from the bank toward them, and he's acting like, I'm just going to go on over the other 3 or 4 miles to the other bank where I told y'all to go. And so they're afraid for their lives. They're totally paranoid. They're afraid for their lives. They see Jesus walking on the water. That doesn't help a lot. They cry out to him, Lord, save us, Lord, save us. And as he's walking, what is he doing? He is proving that he is the creator and that he has laws that are able to suspend the laws that he created, or to use the laws that he's created to get him to new levels of use of those laws. I mean, we didn't know how to fly for a long time, and we learned how to understand the laws of nature so that we could overcome gravity with a thing called an airplane. Jesus had that ability with water. He's just walking. And as he's walking, the storm's going, everybody's afraid, and he's going to act like he's going by. And as he's acting like he's going by, they said, Lord, save us, Lord, save us. And so Jesus pays a little attention to him, but then Simon Peter says, Lord, can I come out there to you? Can I walk out there to you? He said, come on. So Simon Peter steps out of the boat, and he's walking on the water like Jesus. And then he takes his eyes off Jesus and looks at the storm and looks at the waves, and he gets afraid, and he starts to sink. And Jesus has to reach down and save him. Now, I don't know if there's a better illustration of the Christian life than that. I mean, folks, if you'll live the Christian life with your eyes on Jesus, you'll go through the storms. But when you get your eyes off Jesus and get them on the storms, that's when you're going to sink. So don't do that. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Well, you don't understand what I'm going through, preacher. No, I don't. But he does. And I know this much. It doesn't matter much whether I understand the cure. If I'm sick and I know it works, I'm going to take it. So if I know that Jesus can save me from the storm, I need to get my eyes off the storm and onto Jesus. And if you're going through the storm right now, get your eyes off of that water. And get away from thinking about the power of the wind. And get your eyes on Jesus. And you'll find out the one who made the storm can also walk on the storm. And that's the power of that miracle, that John picked these because they weren't in the other Gospels exactly the same way. So he picked those. Chapter 9, he talks about a man that was born blind, and he heals him. Now, that's a powerful miracle because other folks restored sight. And Jesus did some miracles that could be called the restoration of sight. But here, Jesus heals someone who is born blind. That's a whole different thing. Powerful forgiveness there. Powerful miracle to prove who he was. And the last miracle of the signs or symbol miracles in John's Gospel is the raising of Lazarus in the 11th chapter. Lazarus, his friend, just a week or two before his crucifixion, Lazarus, his friend, dies. He goes to see his friend. He's been buried for 4 days, wrapped up like a mummy. And he says, all right, roll the stone away. And they said, no, Lord, he's going to stink. And they said, no, you just roll the stone away. Roll the stone away. And there's Lazarus. He's now newly alive, and he's wrapped in all of those clothes and all of those ointments that were soaking those rags around his body. And like a mummy, he's there and showing signs of life. And Jesus said, loose him and let him go. And Lazarus was risen from the dead. Now, Lazarus would probably die again because Jesus hadn't risen from the dead. And it's like others that Jesus rose from the dead. They were restored in their life. But Jesus, if he has the power to raise Lazarus, then after he dies on the cross for us and rises from the dead, that would mean that he now has the authority to raise us from the dead, and not to just restore us like Lazarus, but to give us his life, which is everlasting life. So when you give your life to Christ, you're born again, spiritually born again into the kingdom of heaven. And when your body dies, you are going to go soul and spirit into the presence of the Lord. The full consciousness of who you are will be in the presence of the Lord. And someday the Bible teaches he's going to give you a new glorified body to go with who you are as soul and spirit. Isn't that going to be fun? Now, if you're not ready for a glorified body, I got something that'll fix that. Age. Just get old. It'll get you ready for a glorified body. You know what I mean? Say, I resemble that remark. Well, I do too. That's exactly the way it is. So in the 11th chapter, he raises Lazarus to life. So 7 super miracles in the Gospel of John that exhibit to us the power of Christ, that helps us now with the biggest of them all, the resurrection of Jesus, that is shown so clearly in the Gospel of John. That in that resurrection of Jesus after his death and his burial, now we can see what we have in Christ because of what happened before his resurrection, and then what happened at his resurrection, and then what happened after his resurrection from the dead. All of them are these powerful signs that John has in his gospel. You know, a lot of places, when the gospel goes to a lot of nations, I have noticed that after they might have a little booklet thing printed about the gospel, that the very next thing that they usually ask for on the mission field is Gospels of John in their language. And there's no accident for that, because it's so powerful. It's so powerful. I've noticed in my travels that when the gospel is coming across a continent, coming across a people group, and it's hitting the resistance of the lostness of the demonic world, and the gospel's coming for the first time maybe in 1,000 years into a culture, that whenever it comes into that culture, at that moment there's a struggle between the power of the gospel and the power that has kept those people in darkness. And overcoming that power is sometimes these kinds of miracles. I have seen whenever people would pray for the sick and they'd get instantly well. And I've seen whenever people would have a problem with a demonic spirit, and church leaders would take that village person that everybody thought was crazy, and they would pray, and that person would be broken and in tears and weep, and then they would be calm, and then they would be normal, and they would know Christ, and they would be a great witness in that community. I have seen that. And I know that when the gospel is going forward like that there are powerful things that God does to verify his presence and his power over the evils that have dominated that culture. I don't think you see it as, I believe in miracles, but I don't think you see the miracles once the culture has the gospel for generations. It's not as prominent, but I believe it's a miracle for somebody to just, I believe an 8-year-old that gives themselves to Christ, that's a miracle. That's taking away a soul from the devil and putting them on the registry of heaven and giving them the promise of hope and freedom and joy in their life. Is that not what we need even in America? Folks, we're coming into a moment of time in America where we need miracles. Now let me tell you why. America has been dominated for 100 years by liberal theology. Theology determines everything else. What you believe about God will eventually make what you believe about politics, what you believe about average lifestyle, what you believe about marriage, what you believe about life, what you believe about God controls all of the rest. And America, that was built upon the gospel of Jesus Christ and was built upon the First Great Awakening and then revived in the Second Great Awakening, America has now been 100 years under the damning doctrines of humanism and evolution. And it has almost destroyed the Western world. And you know what's needed? Just a fresh preaching and teaching of the gospel of Jesus Christ. For Christians to believe that Jesus is the Lord and that there is power in the gospel. And as we believe that, we'll share it, and the world will see the power come back to the Western world when we get back to the gospel of Jesus Christ. The greatest miracle of all is recorded in John's gospel, and it is the resurrection of Jesus Christ in the 21st chapter. And then there's one last miracle. I'm not going to leave it out. There's one last miracle in the last chapter, and it's the miracle of the fishes. Jesus is meeting for one of the last times with his disciples after his resurrection. We know of at least 11 appearances of Christ after his resurrection and before he ascended up into heaven. And they have gone to Galilee. That's home for them. And they're out fishing, which is what they do. And they're out fishing naked, which is what they used to do, and they weren't supposed to, but they were again. And Jesus caught them, at least Simon Peter. And Simon was basically saying, I'm afraid, and I'm going back to my... What was Simon's problem? His problem was he had denied Christ 3 times before the death of Christ. And it ate him up. He didn't think he was worthy. He said, I'm going back to my old ways, and I'm going to fish the way I used to, and I'm not worthy to be. I know he's raised from the dead, and I know he's appeared to me, but I'm going back. I go fishing. And when he used that verb, I go fishing, it's of a tense that means I'm going fishing now, but I'm probably going to keep on for the rest of my life. So he comes in and he says, I'm going to go fishing, and takes some of the disciples with him. And Jesus, in John's gospel here, meets them at the Sea of Galilee, but they don't know it's Jesus. It's just a guy on the shore, and it's almost sunrise, and it's usually the time when people come to the shore to see what the catch is so they can buy some fish. And while they're looking out there at the boats, they can see where the schools of fish are that the guys in the boats can't see because they're in the middle of the lake. And so they're looking out there, and they say, throw your net on the other side. And they didn't realize it was Jesus saying it. And they caught 153 fish. That's a pretty good bunch right there. I don't know where the game warden was, but that's a lot of fish to catch. So they caught 153 fish, and they realized it was the Lord, and Peter was ashamed, and Jesus came to him in his shame with a challenge. Are you going to serve me and feed my people? 3 times. Let me tell you, there are 2 kinds of Christians in this audience right now. There are Christians that are living for the Lord and those that need to come back to living for the Lord. And Jesus has a message for you. And he didn't scold Simon Peter, but he did confront him. Do you love me more than these? He asked him 3 times, talking about the other disciples, talking about the fish, talking about Galilee, talking about the Sea of Galilee, all that was familiar to him. Do you love me more than these? And he said, Lord, you know I like you. And he said, then feed my sheep. Feed my lambs 3 times. Jesus said to him, be the leader you're supposed to be, Peter. Preach on Pentecost, which he would do in just a few weeks. Preach, lead, challenge. Become the man of God that I know you can be. That's the power of John's gospel. John was there. John was the youngest. And John saw what happened in the lives of all the other apostles. And now, John is saying all of this to me and to you. Do you love the Lord? Feed His sheep. Do you love the Lord? Preach the gospel. Do you love the Lord? Take the stand you need to take. Recapture your family. Put Christ first. If you love me, feed my sheep. Those are the miracles that God used in the book of John. All these things were written, John said, so that you might believe. I put mine together so that you might believe. This is the evidence. This is the steps to real faith. Believe and trust Him. If you're here without Christ, give your life to Jesus today. There's only one person in the universe, and his followers maybe, that wants you to put it off, and that's the old devil. Why waste the time? Satan knows Satan will not come to a lost person, somebody that hadn't given their life to Christ. He'll never come to them and say, don't believe in Jesus, don't believe in Jesus. He'll never say that. He'll say, yeah, you need to believe in Jesus, you need to give your life to Christ, but wait till next week. Wait till tomorrow. That's what Satan's lie is. And pretty soon it's the next week, and then the next week, and then the next week, and then a car accident, and then you're gone. You only have the promise of today. If you've not trusted the Lord, give Him your life today.